Hi there, just getting my screen set up and I'm going to go ahead and get them shared. Alrighty, well, welcome. My name is Ashley Doss, and I'll be discussing how a social worker could address the affordable housing crisis presented in the Key Stakeholders video case study. I will focus on the role of the social worker, the type of conflict involved, the conflict management strategy I would use, and how advocacy, collaboration, and empowerment can help create a sustainable solution. The primary community problem in this case is the lack of affordable housing. The community member, Ronhya, explains that residents are being priced out and forced to leave the community. She identifies immediate assistance, affordable housing, and protection against gentrification as important needs. At this time, the private sector representative explains that developers are interested in building housing, but need incentives and support to make affordable projects financially feasible. Local government recognizes the urgency of the problem but faces budget and regulatory constraints. HUD, which is Housing and Urban Development, can provide funding and grants, but needs a solid plan and cooperation among all the stakeholders. Therefore, this is a problem that requires collaboration rather than a solution from just one organization. The social worker's role would be to bridge the different perspectives of all of the stakeholders. I would facilitate communication, make sure community voices are represented, gather feedback and information, coordinate housing related resources, and advocate for vulnerable residents. The social worker would also help maintain trust and transparency throughout the entire process. The case study specifically identifies the social worker as someone who can connect residents with the task force and provide insight into the challenges community members are experiencing. I would classify this primarily as a structural conflict. The conflict is connected to larger systems and conditions, including limited affordable housing, zoning regulations, limited funding, development costs, and displacement. There is also an interest component because the stakeholders have different priorities. Residents want affordability and stability. Developers need financially viable projects. Local government has to consider regulations and budgets, while HUD has to determine how resources can be used effectively. Therefore, the conflict is larger than an interpersonal disagreement. It is connected to how the community's housing system operates. My primary conflict management strategy would be mediation, supported by advocacy. Mediation is appropriate because the stakeholders have different interests, but they have already demonstrated a willingness to work together. As the social worker, I would facilitate respectful communication and help each stakeholder understand the perspectives of the others. I would also help the group identify shared goals rather than focusing only on their differences. Advocacy would be used alongside mediation to make sure vulnerable residents have meaningful representation and that stakeholders with greater financial or institutional power do not dominate the process. The first step would be establishing the multidisciplinary task force proposed in the case study. I would then allow each stakeholder to identify their concerns and priorities. After everyone has been heard, I would help the group establish common ground. For example, all of the stakeholders have an interest in creating a stable and sustainable community, even though they may have different ideas about how to accomplish that. The group could then develop measurable goals, assign responsibilities and timelines, and establish a process for evaluating outcomes. This creates accountability while keeping the stakeholders involved throughout the entire process. The solutions should address both immediate and long-term needs. Immediate strategies could include rental assistance, subsidies, eviction prevention, and connecting residents with available housing resources. Long-term strategies could include increasing affordable housing, adjusting zoning regulations, pursuing federal grants, and developing public-private partnerships. These ideas are based on the stakeholders' own recommendations in the case study. For example, Rania identifies rental assistance and affordable housing, while Francesca discusses zoning changes, incentives, and public-private partnerships. Jazz also identifies higher density development and federal grants as potential strategies. Collaboration should continue far beyond the initial meeting. I would recommend regular stakeholder meetings, sharing community level data, and coordinating resources across organizations. Advocacy would involve identifying policies and practices that create barriers for vulnerable residents and advocating for equitable access to resources. Dreyer's discussion of community empowerment supports the importance of residents having a voice in decisions affecting their communities. Therefore, residents should not simply be informed about decisions after they are made. They should participate in shaping those decisions. The social worker must also balance advocacy with empowerment. Advocacy means helping address systemic barriers that individual residents may not be able to overcome on their own. Empowerment means helping residents develop their own voice, knowledge, and ability to participate. For example, I could help residents understand housing policies, connect them with decision makers, and provide opportunities for them to advocate for their community. Excuse me. I would avoid speaking for residents when they are capable of speaking for themselves. The goal is to work with the community rather than doing everything for the community. In sum, advanced conflict management would involve encouraging active listening, addressing disagreements directly, and maintaining transparent communication. I would also, help stakeholders reframe competing interests around shared outcomes. For example, a developer's concern about financial feasibility could become an opportunity to explore grants, zoning changes, or public-private partnerships that also support the community's need for affordable housing. The goal would not be for every stakeholder to agree on everything. Instead, the goal would be to identify areas of mutual interest and develop solutions that stakeholders can support. And I selected this approach because the housing crisis is a structural problem that cannot be solved by one person or organization. Collaboration allows stakeholders to contribute different resources and areas of expertise. Mediation provides a structured way to address competing interests while advocacy protects vulnerable residents. Empowerment allows residents to remain active participants in creating solutions. So ultimately, I would expect this approach to improve communication, increase community participation, coordinate resources, and support more equitable and sustainable housing solutions. So now let's wrap it all up. In conclusion, the social worker has an important macro level role in addressing the housing crisis. The social worker can facilitate collaboration, amplify community voices, coordinate resources, advocate for vulnerable populations, and empower residents to participate in decisions affecting their community. Each stakeholder brings something different to the table. HUD brings funding opportunities, local government brings policy and regulatory authority, the private sector brings development capacity, and residents bring direct knowledge of their community's needs. The social worker can help bring these resources and perspectives together while ensuring that the community remains an active participant in the process. So thanks for coming along today and listening to this presentation. Thank you.